All right, I'm just doing an update on my research, like I said I would. And yesterday, I was trying to order the research of Esther Watson Tipple, Esther Watson. Let me say that again. Esther Watson Tipple was the daughter of Thomas A. Watson, who co-invented the telephone with that other guy, Graham. What's his name? Graham Bell, I think. I don't know. I'm supposed to know that, but Thomas A. Watson wrote a book called From Electrons to God, and I haven't even tried to look for that book yet. I'm going to do that. He had this concept called the something like about harmonic union, creative harmonic union, which I guess they also called synergy. And Oliver Reiser talks about that in his book, Cosmic Humanism. So this music logarithmic spiral, essentially, I should have. I'm not at the computer, but I should have the Cosmic Humanism book opened up to explain what's going on here. But just to use my hands, there's these three dials. And what Esther Watson Tipple did was that she was a musicologist. That's what she considered herself. She went to Radcliffe. So I don't know. She had two articles, or like three articles published on this concept that she developed with physics professor Royal M. Fry, and he was a physics professor at Boston University, and he started another college in New England. I think it was New Hampshire. That was later on in his career. So he was a very popular professor. He was very enthusiastic, and I haven't read his book either. He wrote a book on applied physics, and I think that was probably in the 1940s. He also reviewed a book on quantum physics that was published in 1945, I think, and that's like one of the first books. It's probably the first book that gets into the philosophy of quantum physics. And so Esther Watson Tipple and Professor Royal Fry, they created this device that they called it Mercator, and I didn't realize that the reason they called it Mercator is because in the 1600s there were two scientists, I don't know if they were brothers or father and son, or maybe they just both had the last name Mercator, and they were inspired by the Chinese tuning of using a 53-note scale that then goes into the octave. And the whole point of music theory is that the perfect fifth, you can create the scale of the 12 notes. Here you have the 12 notes. Oh, this is actually the 7-note diatonic right here. But then in between you have C, C sharp, D, D sharp, or E flat, E, F. So you got the 12 notes here. Okay, no, so the Chinese tuning, the way the way they use the 53 notes is because you're still using the natural perfect fifth of 3 halves, and you're trying to line it up with the octave. And normally what happens is that in the Pythagorean tuning, they just go to, they take, they use 12 perfect fifths, and that ends up being just a little bit beyond 7 octaves. And so that's called the Pythagorean comma, because you get this, it ends up being 3 to the 19th against 3 to the 12th against 2 to the 19th. And that's what the exponentials ratios are, is that it almost lines up with 3 to the 12th and then 2 to the 19th. And the difference is the Pythagorean comma. So if you expand it, instead of using 12 perfect fifths, you use 53 perfect fifths, then you can get it almost perfectly lined up with the octave. But of course, it's still not lined up, and it never will be lined up with the octave. So what Esther Watson Tipple and Royal Fry developed is they realized is that if you use another 7-note diatonic scale here, the C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and you create it out of the what's called just tuning, which is using the chords of the major third as the ratio 5/4. So major third would be C to E. So what they did is they had so you have C, E, G, and then you have F, A, C, so you line up these chords of 5/4. So it's actually 3/4/5 is what the ratio is, or it's 5/4/6 or 3/4/5, and that would be your just tuning scale. And that's why you have these 3 dials on this device. There's 3 dials, so you have 1, 2, 3, just like a clock has dials. And what you do is you rotate, or I don't know if they physically rotate. I haven't, like I said, I was trying to get her papers, and I ordered them through interlibrary loan. I tried to order them. The only university in the world that I know of that has these papers is University of Washington in St. Louis, and St. Louis, Missouri, I guess it is. And so I haven't heard back from them yet because I had to do it through interlibrary loan, but I'm not part of their university, and they would have to. It's the very first year. It's volume 1 of this journal in India called Darshana, and this journal, it turns out, Oliver Reiser was the editor, one of the editors of that journal, so he was on the board of directors, and so he was able to get Esther Watson Tipple's research published in that journal just that first year, and that first year didn't get circulated around anywhere, and that's why it's very hard to find. You can find it starting in 1963, but those very first 2 years, they thank their contributors, and it turns out the contributors, like about 15% of them, are either close associates of Reiser, or they're close associates of Andrija Puharich, and meaning the mind control scientist who worked with Oliver Reiser for this matrix conspiracy based on this music logarithmic spiral. Okay, so to get back to this music logarithmic spiral is, so Esther Watson-Tipple, she's using just the natural numbers of the 2/3 and 4/5, and then by extending the perfect fifths to 53 as a 53 note scale, what happens then is that you have to, like, if you use the tone of A440, which is the international standard for tuning of the 440 hertz for A, because you're also using the just tuning scale, then you cannot use the international standard for C. Instead, you have to use 256 hertz for C. I think that's right. I can't remember, but that's why this dial, you can see the line. The line goes to the second level of the dial instead of the first, because you have the two different scales. You have the just tuning scale of 5/4, and then you have the perfect fifth scale of 3/2. And so that's why she has these different dials, because she's showing that you're adjusting the different, there's still that difference. And now the whole point is, because she just uses the natural overtones of 5/4 and 3/2, then she's able to, what she did with Professor Royal M. Fry is they created a set of tuning forks, Mercator, they called them Mercator tuning forks, and they had 53 of them, and so they were all tuned to these natural number scales. So they essentially, the perfect fifth, and when you use it in 53, I guess it includes that just tuning based on the 5/4. It would include it, because the 4 against the 3 is just the inversion of the 3/2, and then the 5 against the 4 would be let's see, it would be 3. It would be well, you get 3/5, but then you also get 2/5, or so that's just, this is her whole point, is that you have to have these two scales when you're using 5/4, you have to have a different root tonic. And so then she says that the whole secret is that the difference between the 5/4 and the 3/2 is the 9/8. So the 9/8 would be from 9/4, and then you have 5/4 would be 10/8. So you have 10/8 and then 9/8. And so she's saying, her argument is that because 9/8 is between the 5/4 as C to E, and then C to D is 9/8, and then D to E is 9/8. So the 5/4 says 10/8. She's saying that 9/8 is what is able to then harmonize the difference between the 5/4 and the 3/2 scale. And so she calls that 9/8 the cosmic, the secret of the diatonic scale is the cosmic secret, something like that. The secret of cosmic harmony is this 9/8. So, what Esther Watson Tipple did not realize, and again, I haven't read her papers, so I'm going on the discussion she had with Oliver Reiser, as recounted in his book, and he provides a long letter from Esther Watson Tipple, where she's discussing all these ideas. You can read the Cosmic Humanism book on the archive. If you go to archive.org and then log in, you can borrow the book and then read the whole thing there online. And so she doesn't realize she's basically just recreating the difference between Philolaus and Archytas, because this is exactly what Archytas did, is he expanded the Pythagorean tetractys of 1, 2, 3, 4, which would be the inversion of the perfect fifth. He expanded it to 5/4, and 5/4 is the approximation of the cube root of 2. And by having a cube root of 2, this is what ushered in the Renaissance in Europe as the basis for modern science, because when you have the cube root of 2, then you get a three-dimensional perspective. And so in terms of the three-dimensional perspective, what Esther Watson Tipple is arguing is that her scale, by using just the natural overtones of 5/4 and 3/2, she's able to create the undertone as a difference tone in the other direction, which would be the perfect fourth. So normally, so Oliver Reiser, he points out, he said, well, if you read Sir James Jean's book, Science and Music, he says that James Jeans points out that the root tonic and the perfect fifth are overtones of the perfect fourth as F, but the perfect fourth as F is not an overtone of the root tonic and the perfect fifth, which would be C and G. So again, if you have F, then the overtones include the perfect fifth as C and the perfect fifth of G, which is C, which is in music theory that's called a 5 of 5. And you'll use the 5 of 5, for chord transitions and key changes, because if you can go from a 5 to a 5, then now you're in the key of C. And you can do that using the harmonics, because the perfect fifth it's the closest harmonic to the octave. Okay, so where was I? So the whole point that Esther Watson Tipple is saying is, because you do not have to use the chromatic scale, and she's comparing her scale to Paul Hindemith's book on music composition. And Paul Hindemith, his book's also on archive, and he's saying, well, you can use the overtone series to create the whole chromatic scale of which would be the 12 notes, which isn't quite true. It's not true, because as Oliver Reiser is quoting Sir James Jeans, you cannot create the perfect fourth from the overtone series. So when Hindemith is claiming, what Hindemith does is saying, if you take the just tuning scale of using 5/4 and then you line that up against the chromatic scale based on the overtone series, then you're able to create all the notes, as close as possible to the natural overtones as the equal tempered tuning. Something like that. I don't know. His book, I've never liked his book. It rambles, and he seems to be dancing around this whole issue of what is non-commutativity. And this is the whole point, because the perfect fourth is never an overtone of the root tonic if you're using C. Therefore, the perfect fourth is non-commutative as a perfect fifth undertone. So Esther Watson Tipple, she's stating that if you use the just tuning of the major third, which is 5/4, along with the perfect fifths, and that just tuning is included in this 53 note scale, then I guess it's actually not included. She has to use that as a different scale on top of the 53 note scale. And so when you combine those two together, then you're able to create the perfect fourth as a difference tone or an undertone beat in the three-dimensional sense of a spiral that's centripetal, going inwards. So it's the chirality of the spiral is turning in the direction that's going inwards. Whereas if you have the spiral going in the other direction, going out, then you're going to be using a different tuning on this dial. You see? So one of these tunings is going out, centrifugal spiral, and one of them is going inward is the centripetal. And so when you combine those two together, what she's saying is then you get this infinite point of unity that tames infinity, and essentially that would be this non-commutative fifth dimension that you can't see by combining the two directions of the spirals together. And this is what Oliver Reiser, he brings it back to the Theosophists in his book Cosmic Humanism. He says, look, the Theosophists, they already visualized this non-commutative torus of the two different directions of the spirals combined together in three-dimensionally. Okay, so the closest modern science example of that is the Klein bottle, what's called the Klein bottle, which is essentially two Mobius strips combined together in a three-dimensional space. So it's actually four-dimensional, which means you can never see it. You inherently cannot see the non-commutativity. So this is why this concept is considered the secret of taming infinity in terms of science. Now, the problem with it is that in the end, they are the reason it's called logarithmic is because they're falling back on the octave unity, and they're saying because you can have this, you can tame infinity with the octave unity, therefore you can maintain this logarithmic equal tempered tuning. In the end, you can, and this is why you have the 3 dials, because the 3rd dial is the actual equal tempered tuning, in contrast to the perfect 5th tuning and the just 5th 7 note diatonic scale. I mean the just perfect 3rd of 5/4. Okay, so that pretty much explains. I had to think about this as I was talking. I'm sorry for making the smacking noise all the time, but I'm leaning over, and I didn't drink. I should have drank some water before I started talking. But that's the international pitch thing. So what's fascinating about this is she's like, yeah, you need to use the international pitch for A, but for C, you can't use the international pitch because you have to use this other scale. And so the problem is that she still has two root tonics. And by having 2 root tonics, she's avoiding the fundamental issue of non-commutativity, and she's trying to convert the non-commutativity into a contained geometry that's symmetric and from this original logarithmic concept that again started with Philolaus and then was codified by Archytas by using 5/4, just like she used 5/4. And I had devised a mathematical equation based on Archytas that I then sent to math professor Luigi Borzacchini. And I scribbled it down. I had a dream about it, and then I scribbled it down, and I mailed it to him, the scribbled down note. And he mailed me back a note that said, "Your math is good, but there's no proof that this is what Archytas did historically." And around that time, math professor Luigi Borzacchini was having a debate with David Fowler, who wrote the Mathematics of the Plato's Academy. And then math professor Joe Mazer encouraged me to take another look at David Fowler. And so when I looked at that book, I found a quote saying that, David Fowler, he admits that the origins of the irrational magnitude as the Greek miracle of logarithms is somehow originates from music compound ratios. And he says that if we look at music compound ratios, we should be able to answer this question of the origin of logarithms. And Professor Richard McCarahan, he solved this problem because when he translated Philolaus, he was able to figure out what Philolaus was doing. And what Philolaus did was he flipped his lyre around, his musical instrument. He flipped it around, and by flipping it around, he was essentially flipping around this spiral of infinite time. And he was flipping it around, and then by doing that, he was claiming he was able to then contain infinity, tame infinity, by using 9/8. But what he didn't tell anybody was he was using a different root tonic, so he used 0 to 8 as the root tonic to create the perfect 4th from the ratio 8/6. And then he used 0 to 12 as the root tonic for the perfect fifth as the ratio 8/12. And by using two different root tonics of 0 to 8 and 0 to 12, he was then able to create the first logarithmic equation, which is the perfect fifth plus the perfect fourth equals the octave. So as long as we ignore the source of the one, ignore the listening to the source of the one, then we're able to create what I call the liar of the liar. Philolaus was the liar, and he lied about his liar because he didn't tell anybody. I mean, he didn't make it explicit. He just said that the ratios are all that matter, the ratios of ratios as irrational magnitude, what they called a logon, and that listening does not matter, that the listening, we can ignore it. But if you rely on just the pure listening, then this non-commutativity, it means that you can never contain the infinity into a symmetric visual geometry, because the process of listening as infinite time is faster than the speed of light. And because it's faster than the speed of light, what happens when you listen to the source of the root tonic, you are transducing the sound into ultrasound and infrasound, and then into ionized electrochemical energy, and then electromagnetic energy, and then finally into the curvature of space-time itself. In other words, space-time as a three-dimensional space-time, it arises out of this non-local infinite time that can inherently not be seen. It can only be listened to, and so you can never contain it into a visual geometry that's symmetric. And as long as you lie about the root tonic as the one and claim that it doesn't matter, that the one, it can just be a geometric X, and this geometric X then becomes a nihilistic, materialistic idealism that is at the core of the concept of negative infinity in Plato's philosophy as the irrational number of a logon. And it's what math professor Luigi Borzicchini calls the paradox of negative judgment. Because in pre-Socratic philosophy, you inherently cannot talk about the truth. You have to logically infer the source of the one, which is also the source of the self, as the source of the I thought. In other words, you're logically inferring the source of all your thoughts from the source of sound, which is also music. It's the source of harmony, and that's why the cosmic mother was called harmonia from Pythagorean philosophy. And so so Esther Watson Tipple and Oliver Reiser, when they refer to Sir James Jeans saying that the perfect fourth is never an overtone of the perfect fifth, then they're confronting the non-commutativity, but they're never accepting the fact that the perfect fourth is actually originates as a perfect fifth undertone from the same root tonic. In other words, if you start from the root tonic of C, the perfect fourth as F is actually the perfect fifth in the opposite direction. And then the perfect fifth is G as an overtone. And that's the real truth of what's called the Tai Chi, or the Tai Chi in Taoism. They never line up the octaves in Taoism. And in the oldest philosophy of India, the three gunas, it's called the three gunas of no guna, because they also never line up the octaves. They never have this geometric symmetry of a 12-note scale that's contained based on an octave symmetry. So that's the difference. And Esther Watson Tipple with Oliver Reiser, they're maintaining the same foundation of the logarithmic symmetry from Platonic philosophy, from Archytas and Plato, and then Newton, and then Einstein. And Esther Watson Tipple even sent Einstein a letter in 1947, and they corresponded, because her letter, is about her previous conversations and interactions with Einstein. So they were friends, and Einstein supported the research of the World Institute and this same research. So he believed in this philosophy of Oliver Reiser and this claim that you can tame infinity by maintaining this symmetry. But the problem is you can't. It was founded on a lie, an ancient lie from Philolaus flipping his musical instrument, the lyre, around. And the lyre is kind of like a harp. It's basically a harp. And so that's pretty much it in a nutshell. It seems very abstract, but when you have a science, when you have a mathematics that's the language of the science, and it's based on a lie, then that's what math professor Luigi Borzicchini calls the, quote, deep pre-established disharmony as the, quote, guiding evolutive principle, unquote, of science. And so this music logarithmic spiral is the secret driving force of the mathematics of science, because what happens is that as you start with the square root of 2 from music theory, which was 9/8 cubed. It was at first approximated by Philolaus and Archytas as 9/8 cubed. And that was, again, based on this original lie that covered up the non-commutativity. And then you keep expanding that into higher dimensions. So from the exponentials, then you go from squared into cubed for three-dimensional symmetry, and then you go into 4 dimensions, and then when you get to the 5th dimension, then all of a sudden you're confronted by the non-commutativity. And so you have to switch to matrices math. And what Dirac did is he used the matrices math that it was non-commutative from Heisenberg. And what Heisenberg realized is that the spectroscopy, sorry, I can't pronounce that, but of light is from the Ritz-Rydberg principles that he devised the quadratic algebra, but he realized when he showed it to his teacher Max Born realized that you had to use matrices math to solve what Heisenberg showed him. And then Dirac realized the matrices math was non-commutative, but he converted the matrices math into symmetric math using the Poisson bracket. And the Poisson bracket was also used originally in Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism. And originally there was like 20 equations for Maxwell's electromagnetism. But then Whittaker reduced it to 4 equations by using the Poisson bracket. And like if you study Steinmetz who was studying Tesla, and Steinmetz, by studying Tesla, Steinmetz created his own mathematics, and he called it wattless power, because this idea of the quantum potential is this reverse time force from a time reverse signal. And that's why it's wattless, because the watts already assume a symmetric power from amplitude and from this logarithmic mathematics. But if you realize that the mathematics is inherently non-commutative, then you can have wattless power due to what in quantum physics it's called the quantum potential from David Bohm. But it was originally discovered by Louis de Broglie when he was critiquing relativity using quantum physics. Louis de Broglie realized there logically has to be a negative frequency as a time-reversed signal, and he could not call it energy because, again, it's before you're squaring the amplitude for the quantum particle location. But due to the time frequency uncertainty that's inherent to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle of position and momentum, the momentum originates from frequency, quantum frequency. And so Heisenberg's uncertainty principle actually originates from non-commutativity of time and frequency in this fifth dimension. So that's my discussion of the music logarithmic spiral, and hopefully I will get Esther Watson Tipple's papers, and I'll be able to, clean up that what she was saying. But that's why it's still, it's still not it's close but no cigar, as they say. It's so close yet so far. I know that kind of problem. It's a very cool. She came up with a very cool concept, and she recognized the problem. She never called it non-commutativity, but Oliver Reiser, he was relying on Charles Muse's mathematics, and Charles Muse was studying consciousness with Arthur Young. And Charles Muse recognized it as a problem of non-commutativity in the matrices math. But again, they felt, Dirac, felt obligated to convert the non-commutativity back into negative energy that's symmetric instead of negative frequency. So you have this difference between negative energy and negative frequency. It's similar to the current of the electron goes in the opposite direction of the electron momentum because the electron has a negative charge. It's related to that, and that's why you have this backwards precession or time reverse signal between the electron and the proton as the spin. So the magnetic moment is the inherent, the origin of the magnetic force that's non-commutative. And this is what Andrija Puharich figured out, is that he was studying Julian Schwinger, and the Schwinger argued that there has to be a magnetic monopole. So that magnetic monopole arises out of the inherent asymmetric time due to this time reverse signal being a newly discovered force, what David Bohm called the quantum potential. But there's other names for it. And so Professor Basil J. Hiley, he's coming out with a new paper that's discussing the non-commutativity math of Alain Kahn and how to maintain that non-commutativity without needing to use the Schrödinger wave equation. And he just maintain the non-commutative math, and you can avoid the Poisson bracket that converts it back into symmetric mathematics. And you just use the Jordan commutator. And Pascual Jordan, in the 1930s, he realized that it's non-commutative because he was working with Max Born, and he argued in the 1930s that non-commutativity as a time reverse signal, that it's superluminal and it's self-organizing, and it also is self-amplifying, and it's the secret origin of life. It's what life is. And he was the very first person to argue this. And he also, it was also realized that it's the secret to anti-gravity, because it's a propulsive force from a time reversed signal from the future, and therefore it's also called the gravitational potential as dark energy. And this is what Roger Penrose discusses also. And so the argument is that originally that was Nazi technology, or a Nazi concept from Pascual Jordan, and then it got imported into the U.S. when the U.S. brought the Nazi scientists over for Operation Paperclip. And then Andrei Puharich was working with the Nazi scientists at the Edgewood Army Center for Biological and Chemical Warfare in Maryland. And there's no records of MKUltra. They all got destroyed in the 1973, I think it was, or 74, by Sidney Gottlieb. So anyway, that's where everything goes like top secret and black, and there I did personally see the equilateral triangle aircraft that has this superconducting vortex in the center of the craft as a red light, and that's how the gravity is canceled using mercury as a superconducting plasma. Ionized mercury, when you rotate it at high velocity, becomes superconducting. And this was the claim of Edward Fouché, and I looked up all of his research and I corroborated it. They were, it's all on the scientific record. They were doing this mercury superconducting research as magneto, and tying it to the MHD, which is magneto hydrodynamics propulsion. It's ionized propulsion. So once you cancel gravity, then you can use ionized propulsion just like you're in outer space. You're essentially, creating an outer space, space-time environment around the craft. And that's how the gravity is canceled. And I saw that craft so close that I could have hit it with a rock, but I didn't dare take my eyes off it. But other people who've seen it, they've seen it moving very slowly and very low overhead. But then all of a sudden it'll just basically just vanish. It'll just go so fast, and it'll do 90-degree maneuvers at super high speed. But because the gravity is canceled inside the craft, then apparently the pilots of the craft, they don't feel the G-force at all. So it's this triangle craft is seen so commonly that if you go to the National UFO Reporting Center and look in their database under triangle, you can search by shape and you can read all these reports, and there's over a dozen sightings of the craft where the craft is accompanied by military jets. They're either following it or they're ahead of it, but they're very close with the triangle craft. And the aircraft has no fuselage, which is another indicator, it's relying on this canceling the anti-gravity, because it's not relying on the normal principle of lift. With the fuselage, you'd have a change in the wing span dynamic to change the speed under the wings, to provide lift. Okay, so that's all I'm gonna say for now. Obviously, I said too much. So the research continues.